Hello. Well, today we get to look at a really gorgeous plug bayonet that was made in Spain. Now, plug bayonets are the earliest form of bayonets. It may be as old as the late 1700s, which would be pretty neat. First of all, plug bayonets started up somewhere around the 17th century. And the idea is pretty simple, right? You have a gun, you can't use it as a melee weapon except kind of as a club. It'd be great if you could use it as a spear. What if you had a sharp pointy thing on the end of your gun? In this case, kind of a musket. One story on the origin has it that it was French hunters hunting a wild boar, which is, of course, a ferocious beast, who decided to figure out a way to cram their knives into the barrels of their long guns and thereby, make a spear. No idea if that's true, but once this was invented, it spread out quickly. But that might not have happened as quickly as you think. A couple of reasons for that. One is they had pikemen serving these days, and the pikemen would protect the musketeers. And your commander, you want your musketeers firing their guns. You don't want them fighting up close hand-to-hand at all. So it kind of made a certain sense to just keep them free to do that. What the plug bayonet allowed you to do was basically turn your riflemen, your musketeers, into pikemen to a certain extent. So over time, you could see the ratio of the armed forces changing, where they finally came around to just realizing it was better to just have your riflemen ready to fight up close if necessary. And in case it isn't painfully obvious, this one was made in Toledo, Spain, right? Fábrica de Toledo, made in Toledo. So, quick side note, anyone who knows their swords and blades knows that Toledo is one of the most famous blade-making centers of Europe. And no, they didn't always mark their blades this noticeably. This is a billboard as far as this kind of thing normally goes. Pretty rare. But I also know that this exact stamp, same font and everything, chiseled in, was used in Toledo in the late 1800s. Now, the earliest plug bayonets were really simple knives. You can even see illustrations from the 17th century showing this, and it's just a spear point knife, very, very simple tapering handle, no guard, no nothing. And as you can tell, this one is way more than that, right? Eventually, though, they did get guards and kind of just more attention. Like, you might as well have it be a good knife, because you might have to use it that way. You might not get to use it plugged into the barrel of your gun. So that happened over time, and this is a kind of a short lifespan weapon here, because the main drawback is probably pretty easy to guess. You're plugging the muzzle, you can't fire your gun. Think of World War II type bayonets or any kind of modern bayonets, and you can fire your gun while you've got it in place. Huge improvement, no surprise at all that took over. And we should take a second to appreciate the chisel work there. It's just absolutely beautiful. It's on both sides of the blade, and maybe that means this is more of a showpiece than a carry and use, who knows? Either way, it represents kind of the final form, right? It's a nice knife in its own right. It's got a guard. This one has a highly developed kind of fancy guard, of course. And, it's a kind of a Bowie-style blade. It's got the false edge. I mean, this is a true, useful knife, and the handle happens to let you stick it into a barrel. When we talked about their lifespan, and basically think of this weapon, think of its heyday, its era stay as being like a century. Because once people started thinking about ring bayonets, socket bayonets, just different ways to attach it that wouldn't obstruct firing, its time was very, very short, of course. So here's a look at the handle, and you'll always be able to spot a plug bayonet from now on if you didn't know what they were before. If you ever wondered why knives sometimes have these odd tapering handles, that's why. You can actually see signs of wear on this, so, maybe it was actually used. I don't know. The ones I've seen are always just simple wooden handles as well. I don't know if that's a clue here. A gun expert or an old firearm expert could maybe tell us what this means. I definitely cannot. But I like the look of them overall, and it's fully useful, right? You have to hold this in your hand. You have to grasp this in your hand and fight with it. It's going to work just fine. It's okay that it kind of tapers down to allow for that, that kind of fitting mechanism. And then this one has kind of an interesting, almost a pommel at the end. If you're going to hammer fist with this in a fight, then that maybe is what that's for. I think it's probably more decorative, but it's a nice striking end. And don't get me wrong, I clearly assume that a weapon with this much attention to detail was meant to be seen more than used. As mentioned, you can see that the horn there, the handle, is dinged up, so it probably was inserted into a barrel. And, there's an interesting middle space with weapons. Some are showpieces meant only to be seen, but some are ornate because the person could afford it, they were an officer or whatnot, but then they were still going to take it out and use it if need called. So you can see with this view here, you would absolutely have no idea that this was anything other than, say, a fancy knife. A knife that had some extra decorative elements to it. it's easy to kind of dismiss this weapon, this type of weapon, I should say, overall, and that kind of gets done in the literature, but it's easy to forget that this was a really important development at the time, right? And it's kind of a missing link, and that's overstating things, but, kind of a missing link, but bridging the kind of, bladed era to the firearm era and how they then work together. It really had a major effect on military technique, right? Tactics, and kind of paved the way for what we'd see all the way into modernity and kind of really right up to the postmodern era. Back to this one here, it recalls all of that. It's just a lovely piece of work, and it pulls in, Spain's glorious history in terms of swords and blades. Thanks as always.